We're in Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, honky town. Now, first time in Nashville. This was fucking amazing. So thank you, Nashville, for the good times that I had here. Fucking, honestly, I think it's one of the best cities like that I've been to so far. Nashville is super fun and it's super clean. I just really like it. We're on Broadway right now, right? And Broadway is super cool because you just get people like walking around all day and all night. I'm pretty sure like the street like closes down like, I think it's right over here. And like everybody's just like on the street, you know, at night, and like just, it's super fun. And I just really, really fucking love Nashville now. Like this is one of my favorite cities. You actually, most of the people that I met were all from all different places. It wasn't just from here. Like actually, most of the people I met were not from Nashville. Like I would say maybe 40%. And then like the rest, 60%, you know, was like Florida and New York and like all over, like Georgia and all over the place. So it's really, really cool. I think it's one of those destinations where people come to kind of do parties and do like, you know, if you're getting married, you do like bachelorette parties or bachelor parties here, and birthdays, a lot of birthdays and shit like that. So I think that that's really dope. And yeah, Nashville is just a really fun time. It's during the day right now, right? And like, there's so much music playing everywhere. It's kind of like the country center, right? Of music in the world, I guess, or at least in the country. And that's pretty freaking fire, right? All right, the one thing that we're talking about today is the wandering mind, okay? So when you have like wandering thoughts, how do you quiet the mind? We're gonna talk about focus, concentration, the different types of focus, right? And so we'll talk about concentration, we'll talk about open awareness, and all of these things. I think that'll be really, really freaking cool.
Time when we try to focus on the things that would actually give us the most results, we end up spending 80% of the time doing the things that don't actually get us the result. So what I want you to do is write down the goals in the evening, and then the next day, you're going to focus only on the 20% that are going to give you the biggest leverage for that day. Knock it off. Knock it off your list.
So, let me tell you a story. I remember when I was younger and I was not into like spirituality, I was not into meditation and all these things, and how I kind of got into it. So I always thought that meditation was kind of cool, but I was never gonna do that. It wasn't something that I was like, oh yeah, like I'm the guy who does that. Like I'm not the guy who meditates. Like that's not a thing. Like I didn't see the point to it most of the time, right? And this one time I was like meditating at my friend's house, and it was kind of like interesting because they didn't understand it, they didn't get it. But I had this like one kind of experience. And I remember just like sitting there, you know, in Zen, trying to get to Zen, and we kind of just, I got lost kind of, like the mind just kind of went quiet, you know what I mean? And there was no thoughts in my head, and I wasn't super concentrated on anything specifically other than my breathing. And so a lot of times what creates like anxiety would be something like thinking about the future, right? So let's say you're like thinking about the future and shit like that, and you're trying to solve like a problem that's not here. I just saw the movie Inside Out 2. And so in Inside Out 2, there's new emotions, right? Like embarrassment and like anxiety. And I thought that was really interesting and super fun to watch, right? You got to go see it. I mean, I think the movie made like $1 billion already. So I think that that's really crazy. Especially for like a Pixar movie, it's like a sequel. And I don't know, like the last movie to make like $1 billion this fast was like Barbie or something, right? But this one is good because it's kind of, I like it more because it's about psychology and emotions and things like that. I just really love that topic, right? And we can get a little bit into that today. So basically there's different types of emotions, and these kind of occur when there's like specific situations or events in your life, right? That make you feel like a certain energy inside of your body. And so when you're feeling a certain emotion, it could be like happiness, right? And even in the movie Inside Out 2, they'll kind of talk about like repressed emotions, right? And it's like when you don't let yourself feel a certain thing, like anger or sadness or even happiness, right? Or joy. You're kind of like repressing, and like it's kind of funny in the movie. It's like, no, we're repressed emotions. Like they get taken away, like joy and anger and sadness gets taken away, and all she feels is like anxiety and embarrassment. And it's a super fun movie, honestly. So I'm sure you might have seen it, because I mean it made like $1 billion already, but if you haven't, definitely go see it. It's super fun. And one of the things that you kind of see in that is that anxiety kind of takes over and tries to solve like issues, right, that are coming up in the future. So it's not like right in front of you trying to solve that issue, but you're kind of thinking ahead, and you're like, okay, well, this is coming up, this is coming up. And here's the thing, is the wandering mind kind of like a good thing or a bad thing? Like usually when you're like wandering, right, maybe you're wandering like all day long. It's like your mind is just kind of all over the place. You're thinking about this, you're thinking about that, and you're constantly kind of thinking, right? And so when you study things like Zen, or you study like Buddhism, or even I think like Hinduism or Tao, right? Like the Tao Te Ching and stuff like that, you kind of like get this sense that you can quiet the mind, okay? The point of meditation, like why do people even meditate? What's the point, right? It might be to be less stressed. So I used to go around the country during 2020, and we did this company basically helping with stress management, and I would help healthcare workers with stress management. Now I'm more focused on focus and attention and concentration and getting you to quiet the mind, right? And so I basically went around the country to like Oregon, and you know, we were in LA and Seattle and Dallas, and I mean, we just made videos in New York, right, and Philly. I love that Philly video on the steps, so super cool. Go check that out. And that one was about like positive action, basically just taking positive action and not creating any more pain or hurt on the outside by just having like inner body awareness and acting from a place, right, that's super chill and kind of peaceful. And so when you're trying to concentrate, if you can't, you might be distracted by different things. I think one of the best things, we just did a video in Washington Square Park, and it was about setting goals and like manifestation. So a lot of people will be like reading like The Secret. I remember when I was younger, I read The Secret. Actually, you know what's funny? I was walking around, I think it was like New Jersey, and outside like the movie theater. I freaking love movies, so super fun. But I was walking outside, and on a bench there was The Secret, on like just a bench by itself. It was like the book The Secret, but it was in Spanish, which I think is just super hilarious. Now, I never read it. I actually watched like the documentary when I was younger, and I thought that it was kind of interesting. And another movie that was really weird, like, you know, sometimes you go down like specific rabbit holes, like maybe on YouTube or something like that, and you'll find like different movies and things like that, or kind of like these long form videos, like of 2 hours. They're kind of movie length, and they'll talk about like weird shit, right? They'll talk about like weird things. You're just kind of like conspiracies kind of thing, you know? And you're just like, what am I watching? Like, what is this? And so I remember this one time I was hanging out with my friend Nick, and he's like, yo, you ever seen this movie called Zeitgeist? And I was like, nah, man. I was like 18 or something. I was super young. But this movie kind of like opened my mind. I don't know if it's like a great movie or not, but when I watched it and I was 18, I was just like, it felt like more legit than like what I was being told, right? So if you think about like the 60s or like the 50s, right? In the 50s, you had like a very traditional kind of world, right? Especially in America, right? Yeah, it's like it was very, very traditional. And so what happened in like the 60s and 70s was like kind of a revolution of those traditions, because the people were basically going to school and getting taught things that they weren't seeing in reality, right? So like you're looking around you every day and you're seeing the reality of what things are, but then maybe you're watching the news and they show you something completely different. Or maybe you're watching YouTube, right? Or you're watching social media now and you're seeing like a completely different reality to what you're actually experiencing every day. Now this might have gotten better or worse, but in the 50s, they would be like watching videos and like everybody would be like very proper and things like that, but it wasn't the reality of what they were seeing. So what they were like being taught in school, right? If you think about one of those videos, like from the 50s, like teaching things, right? It was like, here's how to make the next beef for your husband. Here's how to cook it. Okay, first you go and you cut the pickle. Right? Like, and then you go home and like your parents are arguing or something, like in the 60s or 70s, right? And you're like, this isn't real. Like this is not what life is like. This is not what I'm experiencing every day on the outside in reality. And so there was like a counter culture shift, right? The hippie movement happened. It was like, yo, I want to smoke weed. I want to just like, go to Woodstock. I want to listen to rock music. And so like rock music was kind of like, you can't listen to rock music, right? Like that was like, oh, it's too hardcore. It was too crazy to listen to rock music. It's too edgy, it's too urban or whatever. I remember like Kanye said this about Michael Jackson when he was getting into fashion. He's like, I'm getting into fashion, but it's like I'm a rapper and I'm a producer, and getting into fashion is not something that we usually do. And he's like, I remember when Michael Jackson couldn't get into MTV, like they wouldn't play him on MTV because he was too urban or too edgy or something like that. It's like the same thing happened with like rock and roll, right? Where it's like before there was like the radio, and you would like turn on the radio. Have you ever seen, there's like a movie called The Pirate Radio or something like that. And basically like these people go on this ship and they're like broadcasting rock music, and everybody in like England or some shit like that is like listening to this rock music. But the reason why like the government is like trying to stop them from playing the rock music, and the reason why they're able to is because they're on this boat like in the middle of like the sea, and so they can't get to them, and so they're able to broadcast the rock and roll music to everybody, and everybody's just like, yes, the rock and roll music, it's so beautiful, this is awesome, this is what we want, right? Like the youth is like, this is what we want the rock and roll, right? So rock and roll, right? You gotta rock and roll. And so I would just urge you to maybe think about today, like what's something edgy that you're not allowed to watch today, that people are like, no, you're not allowed, that's not good, that's not cool. It's outside the Overton window. It's outside of the acceptable thinking of the time. And if you think about like the 50s or 60s, that was kind of like, you had the traditional kind of thing. Then there was like the hippie movement, like in the 70s, which is super cool because it was counterculture to what they were seeing. They were like, this isn't real. We want to live like what we see in real life, and we want to kind of share that, right? And so then you have like things like Woodstock and the concert there and everything is amazing, right? And so when you're having like a mind that's wandering, things like ADHD and things like this. So there are studies that show that if somebody has like ADD, they're actually a bit more creative, right? Because if you're always just very concentrated on a specific task, you're kind of a bit more logical, right? And so if you're kind of like a bit more logical, you're more concentrated on what you're doing, but you're not letting your mind wander around. So is this good or bad? It's kind of like good and bad, because if you find like somebody who has like ADD or something like that, and they're wandering a lot, like their mind is going from here to there and they can't concentrate, right? It's not a bad thing. There's studies that show that people with ADD actually are more creative. They can think of like things on the fly. They can like think of new ideas, right? Because they're not like super concentrated and logical on something. They're kind of like letting their mind just go from here, go to there. So it's not a completely horrible or bad thing to let your mind wander, right? I think a lot of the time our mind wanders to different things. Now, I've been studying and teaching concentration and things like meditation and stress management for the last 5 years, ever since like 2020 and before that, right? So to me, I always preach kind of like, you gotta focus, right? You gotta stay on top of the task. You can't let your mind wander. The whole point, right, of like meditation is to not let your mind wander. You're kind of like thinking or overthinking a lot of the time, and you just want to kind of sit there and you want to go into inner body awareness and you want to like meditate and you want to just quiet the mind. You want to just like have no thoughts. You want to clear your mind, right? And so I think that this is good for concentration, but there are those 3 different types of attention and focus. I got this, I was just on the plane ride to Nashville, right, from New York area, and I was reading this book called Focus by Daniel Goleman. And what was funny about this, and it's kind of how our memories kind of fail us sometimes, right? There are studies of like different things, like where, you know, you would have like a criminal case or something like that, and they would look at the witnesses and they would ask them, like, do you remember who it was? And they'll show like this different people. But a lot of the times, I don't know if it's like 5 out of 10 times or something like that, or half the time, or maybe it's 40%. I'm not 100% sure, you can look this up, right? But most of the time, their memory kind of fails them. Like, they don't really know what they even, like, you can't recall exactly who it was or what they looked like or something like that. And a lot of the times they end up like, it's like the wrong person that they pick, right? So our memories are a bit faulty. And so I didn't remember this, but I had read like the book before. So I was like underlining it. And what was really funny was that I'm like reading it at the airport, right? And they're like talking over the loudspeaker. They're like, flight 327, you know, next, to like blah, 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 or whatever. And there's like all these people talking. Mostly it was like people on their phone, right? And that's another thing. It's like before, if you think about the 50s, you didn't have social media. You didn't have your phone all the time. And so now you're getting bombarded all the time. Like, notifications are the new thing. What's the best way to sell something today? Most of the time, it's tech companies, right? They're making billions of dollars. And the way they're doing this is by having applications that go on your phone, right? And so if you have an application on your phone, you're getting notifications. The same thing if you think about like YouTube. If you're thinking about YouTube, and I used to like make YouTube videos since I was like 10. I remember grabbing a camcorder with my friends and like going around the house, like trying to think of a story. And then later like creating like scripts, right? And going out and shooting the scripts and editing it and doing visual effects with like, you know, shooting and shit like that, and bombs and stuff like that. We did like this one where it was like a snowball fight and like, you know, it was like a snowball fight, but like the people would just like collapse and then like blood would splatter. It was super fun, right? It was like visual effects of like the blood and stuff. And then there's this one part where like my friend grabs this big snow thing and he like throws it over this hill and then it explodes. And I remember like editing it, and it was like the explosion visual effect, and we overlaid like 2 of the clips, and one of them was like the mountain, and so we cut out the bottom of the mountain, so you're seeing the mountain, and then we would put the explosion on the background, and then so it would seem like it was behind it, and then we would color it white. So if like you color it white, then it looks like snow is exploding, and it was kind of like this epic snowball fight war, right? With visual effects, and that was like awesome. It was super fun to make. So our memories kind of like are faulty sometimes, and I didn't even think about that I had read this book before. So I'm sitting at the airport and I'm reading this book, and the funny thing is that it's about concentration. It's about concentration and focus and the different types of focus, and yet I'm trying to concentrate and read while all of these distractions are around me. And so if you've seen my video in like Times Square, right, there are so many billboards and so many distractions in Times Square, and there's like thousands of people walking around in Times Square. And I'm just sitting there for like an hour and a half, just kind of like doing my thing, right? Staying focused on the topic and not getting distracted by all of the different, ads and all this stuff. But here we're in Nashville, and it's like a more chill kind of city. I love Nashville. It's super chill. I would totally recommend, if you've never been here, to definitely come check it out, right? And so it's definitely a bit more chill than Times Square, but it's still like super fun. And so my memory was faulty in the airport, I realized, because I got on the plane and I'm still reading the book like the whole time. Everybody else is like on their phone or sleeping. And I'll get back to talking about how the phone and how like social media and like the apps have really kind of affected this, because we're constantly getting distracted and getting like kind of these hits of dopamine from getting the notifications or getting messages or checking our email or checking Tinder or checking your social media, your Instagram, your Facebook, and all this stuff. And it's constantly distracting you from what you got to do. And so for me, right, like I said before, your mind can kind of wander, right? Like it'll wander from here, it'll wander from there. And that is okay, because you're allowing your mind to kind of just do whatever it wants to do. And here's the thing, a lot of the times when your mind wanders, is it productive or not productive? You would think that maybe it's not productive because you're like, I'm all over the place. I'm like trying to figure something out. And the mind is good for that. Like it's good to plan, right? The last video was in Washington Square Park, and I talked about manifestation, but also a practical sense for it. How you kind of like just write down your goals, right? And I would say the evening before. This is something that I got from No Excuses or Brian Tracy. You can look up videos by Brian Tracy, and this is kind of what he teaches all out of the time. He'll be like, look, you got to just write down the goals. Write down every goal that you have for this year, right? I love doing that. It's so awesome. This year I wanted to go to New York. I wanted to go to Philly. I wanted to go to Nashville. I want to go to Chicago. I want to go to Austin. And all of these things are on my list for this year of things that I want to do. Those are the goals, right? I just like traveling. That's my definition of success, is to travel and experience the country. It opens my mind. It lets me just kind of like just expand your mind. Like never being in a new place and just coming to a new place. The first time I got here, I was just walking around like Broadway, and I went down this road and they were showing a commercial on this big screen, and it reminded me of New York, right? But they were showing this commercial of a movie that's coming out called Twisters. And what it made me think of, right, I love marketing. I talked about in the Times Square video, I talked about ads and marketing and sales, right? And how like all these different companies are trying to distract you and get your attention to sell you a product or a service. And I was kind of loving this TV showing Twisters, the trailer for Twisters, because I was like, I think I've seen this trailer at a bunch of different cities already. And it just made me think, like, if you ever want to market a specific product or service, maybe you want to look at these cities, right? And maybe you want to pay. Also, when you go before a movie, they have ads, like before even the trailers of the next movies that are coming out. You have like these ads, right? And so the ads are for different businesses and for sometimes local businesses. And so those ads you can call, like, I think it's like NCM or something like that, or they have different companies or marketing agencies that you can call and actually pay them to put your ad before the movie, right? And I actually remember like hitting them up like recently just to get information about it. I thought it would be kind of interesting because an audience, right, that's at the movies is sitting there for a long period of time to watch a movie for like 1 or 2 hours, and you can put your ad like before the movie. I thought that was kind of cool. But also here, like, it kind of expanded my mind of like marketing, because I was like, look, you can go to all these different places and you can go to like, all the different cities, and they'll market like a similar product or a similar movie or something like that. And you can kind of think about this for the company that you work for, or you can think about if you have your own business, if you're a leader for your company, or if you're doing any marketing and things like that, right? Of like picking specific cities maybe where you would have your audience, And nowadays, like, you don't really have to do that. I just thought it was cool. It kind of like expanded my mind. I don't think maybe that's the best way to do it today, just because you do have your phone, right? And on your phone, they're basically like listening to everything that you're doing and saying, and they're kind of spying on you all the time, right? And the marketers use this information and use this data. Like, all the social media companies are listening to what you're saying to your friend. Like, you have a conversation, you've had that happen to you, right? You're like having a conversation about dog toys, and all of a sudden you get the ads for dog toys, right? You're like, why? Like, how did this happen? It's because they're like listening to you. But also, there's AI now, there's artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence is kind of like listening to all these keywords and then bringing the products and services that you're interested in and kind of making them, like when you go on the home page of like a specific website or something like that, they're showing you things that are relatable to what you searched. They're showing you things that are relatable. Like, if you look up Xbox or something like that, all of a sudden you're getting ads for Best Buy and things like that. So there might be a better way to market your product or service if you do it online nowadays, with using AI and all that stuff and using social media, because you get way more targeted ads. Another thing that has happened, right? Like, there was that counterculture in the 70s, but something that's happening today is that there's so many niche subcultures. Like, there's like the specific thing that you're into, you can find online today, right? And so, like, maybe you want this specific thing and you like this specific way, and it's like you can find groups, you can find people all around the country that are kind of like into that stuff. And it's very niche, it's very like subculture, right? Before, you had like the TV and everybody, like you basically had like a broadcast and everybody would be watching the same thing, like throughout the entire country, like Saturday Night Live, right? Every Saturday night, when that show like first came out, it was like a ritual. Like, everybody wanted to sit down on Saturday night and watch live from New York. It's Saturday night. Like, everybody watched the same thing. And so when you went to work and you wanted to talk to like your friend about it or your coworker, right? You would talk about like that show that you all watched together. But now when you go online and stuff like that, you're just kind of like watching your own thing. Like, you're watching this obscure YouTuber that nobody's heard of. And then there's like the hipster culture that kind of like happened a few years ago. I don't even know, is that even going on anymore, right? Like the thrift shops, like that became really popular. And it was like, I remember, right, when I was in high school, that was like the cool thing. Like, I remember going to the thrift shops and getting cardigans. It's like, you know the song, right? It's like, I wear your granddad's clothes, I look incredible, right? So, super funny. I got it for $1 at the thrift shop. So that was like a hipster kind of culture. And so I think that was interesting that kind of shift happened. Because a lot of times, even today, like, you don't have that. It's like you want to live like the rock star kind of lifestyle, maybe, right? And it's like rock stars like traveling or touring or something like that. Like, back in the day, you would stay in like some weird motel or some shit like that, right? You were like just fucking living, man, like, for real. But now we're like in the social media age, and everybody wants like to be rich, and everybody wants the Lambo, and everybody wants like the mansion and all the stuff, right? It's like, that's the culture that like people want. It's like, okay, that's fine. But I remember the hipster movement, how they made it cool to be a nerd and stuff like that. Like, my favorite artist is Childish Gambino and Donald Glover. He's like an actor, writer, rapper, right? And I love it because he's like a really Renaissance man. He does like all kinds of stuff. Like, he just released a movie that's coming out with a soundtrack to like the next album that he's releasing. And I remember when in 2010, Because the Internet came out. That's like one of my favorite, if not my favorite album of all time. It's called Because the Internet. And in Because the Internet, he basically wrote like a screenplay to the album. And you could kind of read the screenplay as you're listening to the music. And it gives you like a glimpse. Like, I remember there was a website where you would go and you would like read the script, and then there was like little video clips, and then you would listen to the song, and then you would keep reading the script. And it was awesome. Like, that was such a interesting idea. I felt like it was almost like a modern kind of musical type thing, right? And then now he's like making a movie, like an entire movie. It's like a sci-fi movie, but he's also releasing the soundtrack that he made to the movie, and it's like the soundtrack is the album and the album is the soundtrack to the movie. Like, that's so cool, right? And so that's why, you know, Gambino's my favorite artist, but he was one of the people that kind of led the hipster movement. That's at least what I remember. And if you listen to like Redbone, right, you had just like the woke culture. I remember when I first started making like self-actualization and meditation and spiritual kind of videos, the name was Woke Wisdom. And at the time, okay, I got that from his song Redbone. It was like, right, the song Redbone is like stay woke, right? But that's the thing, like then the woke culture kind of came and changed that completely. Like to me, in a spiritual sense, when you think about that, it's like you're being spiritually awakened, right? Like Buddhism or something, they'll talk about like enlightenment, they'll talk about the Satori experience, and how you could be like spiritually awake. And so like stay woke means like stay awakened. But that has changed, right? Because then like the woke mob came and kind of changed the way that was like being what it is. They kind of changed what it is. It's like, is woke even, you know, being spiritually awakened? Like nobody thinks about that. It's like, no, it's just a cult basically of people like just kind of saying like the same thing and like not really thinking for themselves. It's like if somebody tells them to do something, they'll just do it because they're not thinking. They're like in mob mentality and shit like that, right? And like they're getting angry and they're like fighting each other, and it's like, you don't believe what I believe and blah 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 blah. When it's like, if you were actually, you know, spiritually awakened, or if you were religious, right, if you follow the Bible or anything like that, it's like you wouldn't have war, right? Like all religions point to the same thing, which is oneness with all life. But getting back to concentration and the different types of focus, and now my memory was kind of faulty. So I'm like at the airplane and I'm like reading this book, like underlining, and all of a sudden I get to like the third chapter and there's underlines. And I'm like, wait, like this is not a used book. Like I bought this book new. Why? How is it underlined? And then I remembered, like, I had read this already. Oh crap! Like, I guess I had read this book already, and I just didn't even remember. And that actually keeps happening. So it's like why I love rereading books is because a lot of times you forget. It's like you remember maybe 10 things of what you see. You remember maybe 20% of what you read, and then you remember maybe like 50% of what you did. So why is teaching, like I love teaching, but one of the best things about teaching what you love or teaching like anything is that it's for you. Like you learn it even more, right? Like maybe you're kind of good at skateboarding, right? Like you can do an ollie, you can do a kickflip on a skateboard, and then you're teaching like your friend how to like pedal on the skateboard, right? It's like just get on and just flow, right? It doesn't mean that you're like the best or anything like that, but you're a couple steps ahead of them. And so teaching them how to do that will actually improve you being able to do that as well, right? If you're teaching your friend how to ollie and you already know how to do like a tray flip, right, or a kick flip or something like that, then you will get better at doing ollies because you're breaking it down for them. You're teaching them how to do it, right? And so as they're learning it, you're also like breaking it down, and you're also able to see it, and you're like, oh, like how am I doing it? Is this how I'm doing it, right? And so then you're able to do like a bigger kickflip or a bigger kind of ollie or something like that because you're teaching it as well. And so that's why I love teaching, but it's because the actions that you take, you'll remember like 50% of it, where everything that you read, you kind of like remember maybe 20%. I love reading. I reread things. Like every year I reread Way of the Peaceful Warrior. It's one of my favorite books of all time. If you don't know about that book, it's basically like there's Dan, and he's like a gymnast. He's like in the Oakland area, like in the Bay Area, and he's kind of lost in life. He doesn't know kind of like where he is, or like he doesn't know a lot. He's not wise, right? He's like 18 or something, and he goes into a gas station late at night, and there's this old man, and the old man jumps on the roof, and he's a gymnast, so he's like, yo, how did he do that? He runs back to the gas station and he's like, oh, it was a ladder, there's a ladder there. And then he goes and there's no ladder. He's like, okay, you have a twin. You definitely have a twin, because there's no way you jumped on the roof so quickly and then got back down so quickly. Like, how did you do that? And he's like, all right, come back come back tomorrow night and I'll teach you. And so Dan starts coming to this gas station at night to learn from Socrates, this old man, and he teaches him the way of the peaceful warrior. And the way that he was actually able to get on the roof is this one passage. I love this book. I read it every year. You guys should 100% go read it. It's freaking awesome. And there's so many like different lessons and different things from it that you can take and apply to your life. And like, it's amazing. Like, when you first read the book, you'll kind of think about yourself as Dan. You kind of like relate to Dan a lot more. Like, maybe you're angry and stuff like that. Like, I remember when I first read it, I was like, this old man is like annoying. You get what I'm saying? But now I read it after reading it so many years, and I relate to Socrates the most. Like, I'm like, oh man, the old guy, he's right. Like, Dan is so Dan is so uptight, you know. Dan is like just getting mad. Like, one of the passages I love is like they're out in doing a picnic with Joy, and Joy is one of Socrates' old students, and it starts raining, and Dan just gets really angry. He's like, no, it's raining, like, this sucks. We were gonna do this picnic and it's raining now and it's ruined. And Joy and Socrates are just like laughing. They're like, oh, the rain, and they're like rolling around in the leaves. Right? They're just having fun because you can't control the rain. So how are you gonna get mad? Like, it's all good. Like, you just kind of rolling with the punches, right? That's one of the lessons. But there are so many other lessons in it. And I just love the fact that when you first read it, it's like you relate to Dan, and then after a while you just start laughing at everything that Dan does, and you start just loving Socrates and like what he's teaching, because it's just so funny. Like, you'll poke kind of at Dan's buttons, and it's just like really, really funny. So I really love that book. And so why do I read it every year? Every time that I read it, or think about, I love listening to Sermon on the Mount. If you watch that on YouTube and you look that up on YouTube, right? Sermon on the Mount, it's from the Bible, right? And so it's Jesus, he's like going up on this mountaintop, and he's like talking to his disciples, and he's like, yo, here's kind of like, you know, you have heard that it was said that you should not murder. But I say, if you're angry at a brother, right, you've already committed the sin. And okay, whether it's kind of interesting. I listen to it, and every time I listen to it, I like get something out of it. Like, I'm like, oh fuck, like I forgot to do that. Oh damn, I forgot to do that, right? Oh damn, I forgot to do that. Oh man, and you just feel like, damn bro, like, how did I forget? It's because it's like you're living life, you're getting distracted, especially with the phones nowadays, right? Like 30 years ago, you didn't have a supercomputer in your pocket, and now you have like AI, and I just really wonder what's gonna happen with that. But right now, you're getting notifications. Like, one of the best ways that a company could sell to you is by getting you notifications specifically to your phone. Like, that's why they want you to download the app. They want you to download the app because then they can send you notifications throughout the day for you to buy their product or for you to get their service. Like, if you're getting Lyft, right? Like, I'm using Lyft to get around and stuff like that while I'm traveling. And I get notifications from Lyft. It's like 10% off if you order in the next hour or whatever, right? And it's like, do you think I'm not gonna see that? It's like the battle, right? It's for attention when it comes to like marketing. You could read books like Purple Cow by Seth Godin, and he'll talk about how you gotta stand out, and how basically it's like there's so much going on nowadays. Like, if you go to the cereal aisle in the, you know, at ShopRite or something like that, or at different grocery stores, you have like 100 different cereals or something like that, right? Like, how are you going to get the customer or get the client, let's say you're making cereal or something like that, to focus like on your brand of cereal? Why would they buy your brand of cereal when there's like 100 different choices? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, that's what Purple Cow is about. It's about like standing out, basically. Like, if you're going through a farm and you're seeing like a black and white cow, black and white cow, black and white cow, right? Just a cow, it's just a cow. But then you see a purple cow, you're like, what the? You're like, yo, look, it's a freaking, what is that? Like, what the heck, right? So that's kind of the same reaction that kind of makes money, dude. It sucks, right? But when people are doing like crazy weird stuff, when you're getting like rappers like 6ix9ine or something like that, tattooing his face with a 6ix9ine, right? And he's like, blah, 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 blah. Like, he's trying to get attention. He's trying to get people to talk about it, right? Why? Because it's like, oh my God, it's standing out. Like, did you see that? Did you see the guy that has a 6ix9ine tattooed on his face? Like, what? Right? That's the reaction that they're looking for. When you watch the news, it's the same thing. Boom. Oh, breaking news. Somebody just like got killed. Blah, 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 blah. Like, how are you not going to look at that? It's like, did you hear about it? Did you hear about the boat that crashed into the bridge? Did you hear about it? It's like everybody's talking about the boat on the bridge. It's like who fucking cares, dude? Like, who cares? You get what I'm saying? But they're trying to get your attention, right? And so that's the most precious thing, because your attention and the time that you spend on things, right? My whole thing is about teaching concentration. But like I said before, you can do like wander, like your mind wanders all over the place. You're going from this topic to this topic and all that. And you're like, throughout the day, you're thinking, oh, but the biggest thing that actually gets your attention is emotions. That's why I was talking about inside out before, right? So if something bad happens, think about like the last time that somebody like screamed in your face or something. Think about the last time that somebody did something to you that was like, you did not feel good about it. Think about it for a second, right? How much did you think about it? How much did it magnify your focus on that specific thing? How long did it take you to get, like, to forget about it, to forgive and forget? In the last video, Washington Square Park, we talked about forgiveness, right? And how you should have discipline to be able to forgive. And the faster that you're able to forgive whatever somebody did to you or something bad that somebody did to you, the faster that you can come back and focus on what's actually going to help you. Concentrate on the tasks. And we talked about how you can kind of go through and manifest, but really it's just setting goals, right? So a practical sense of looking at that is the evening before, you're setting goals for yourself, and your subconscious mind throughout the night is actually working on trying to solve those issues. It's like, how am I going to do that tomorrow? You get what I mean? So wandering is not that bad, because a lot of the times you would think like, oh, my mind is wandering from here to here, but it's most of the time trying to solve problems. It's trying to solve problems that you have. It's trying to be like, okay, how do I survive? How do I provide? How do I, make more money? How do I get this thing done? How do I get my car, right? So that I could how do I do my oil change tomorrow? Like, it's solving all these issues that you have. And so one thing is, though, sometimes you can get filled with overwhelmed with so many different problems and things like that. And I've talked before about like what Eckhart Tolle teaches, like the power of now. And Eckhart Tolle will teach how basically you have like problems don't exist. And when you hear that, you're like, dude, I have a lot of problems, all right? I got tons of problems. I gotta like catch my flight. I gotta I gotta get a hotel. I gotta freaking go from here to here. I didn't sleep that much. Like, I gotta work. I gotta figure this thing out at work. I gotta market. I gotta read this book. Like, there's tons and tons of things that you have to do, right? But what he says is that basically you have things that you can do right now and things that you're doing right now, and then you have other things that you can plan for. And so using the mind and wandering is good because you can plan. Like, being logical is good because you can plan what you're going to do. But what I would say is, once you have your plan set, right, then you have spontaneity as well. And so like maybe something else comes up. Like last night, I was getting, we ended up at like 5 a.m., right? Trying to go back to the hotel. And my buddy is like, yo, let's film a video. And I was like, that is not on my schedule, dude. Like I don't even have that much time to be able to sleep. So it's like right now, I just want to go and get some sleep. You get what I'm saying? But it was spontaneous. And I think that was like kind of something that you kind of, maybe I need to work on, right? Where it's like right now, I have a set schedule. But I've also had times in my life where I didn't have anything scheduled, okay? I was just kind of like, whatever happens, happens, like whatever. Everything was on a whim. It's just kind of like spontaneity all the time. It's like, we'll do this, spontaneous. We'll do that, spontaneous. Like nothing was actually planned, right? But as I've gotten older, I'm like, dude, I don't have that much time. Like, even if I live another 30 years, if I live another 40, 50 years, like to me, that's not a lot of time, right? And so I have to kind of keep a schedule because I'm like, dude, I don't have that much time. Like if I don't get to this year, if I don't get to this month, if I don't get to this today, it will never happen. It will never happen. So I have to get to it right now. I have to set the goal, make sure that I put time aside for it, and then get to it. Like I'm not gonna go and sit there and not write down my goals for the next day. This is something that Brian Tracy teaches in No Excuses, right? He's like, write down your goals the evening before or the day before or during the day, right? And rewrite your goals. Most of the time, if I'm overwhelmed and I have a lot going on, I go and just rewrite everything that's on my mind. It's like journaling, right? You're just kind of like, okay, this I got to do, this thing, how am I feeling? What the heck is this? Like, what is, like everything that's on your mind, this thing that happened to me, oh, this person, this, whatever's on your mind, just get it out of your head and just write it down, man. Write it down, make a video, do something to get it all out of your head, okay? Once you get it all out of your head, you can kind of take a look and then you can look back if you want. But here's the thing, I don't actually look back. I take notes. Like how many people take notes and they don't look at their notes? What's the point of taking the notes? Like it's fine, maybe you do look back at your notes, but it doesn't matter. It's for you to remember even more, right? Like you're taking notes because it helps you remember it. And then I write new notes. I'm like, okay, well I gotta do this, but it's a new day now, and I got other stuff that's on my mind, other things that I gotta do. You could stay on topic too. Like maybe set a goal for the year. You're like, okay, this is the goal for the year, and so every day you're moving forward towards that goal, but also maybe I got this going on, maybe I got that going on, maybe I gotta figure this out. And so I just get it all out, I put it on the piece of paper, right? Or I like writing, so I'll just physically write it on a piece of paper. But you could do this on your phone, you could do a video or something like that, you can record it or something like that. Get it out of your head. I like writing it because then I can see it and I can be like, oh, okay. And then I basically rewrite it and summarize it. Where do I put it? Like you're basically organizing your thoughts in your mind. You're like, okay, this. You know what really helps with this too? Meditation. If you're actually sitting there for like an hour or 20 minutes, you know, if you're busy, I get it, maybe 20 minutes or something like that, and you're just focusing on your breathing. And so there was like a lawyer, right? And so in Focus by Daniel Goleman, he has a story about basically like a lawyer, litigation, and he's like dealing with like criminals all the time and things like that, right? And he's trying to basically stop thinking about all of these cases that he has. Like it's really hard. He goes home at night and he's just getting angry, you know, at the people that are like suing his guy that he's like trying to help, right? And he's like the defendant or something like that, and he's like getting angry and he can't stop thinking about it, and he's just like, oh, how am I gonna like help this guy, how am I gonna get him out of this situation or whatever, and he can't stop thinking. And so on a flight he like met this like meditation teacher, somebody like taught meditation, and he was like, how do you do that? Like I always wanted to do it, but I just like never got around to it. Like how do you do it? What do you do? And he was like eating some raisins, and so she's like, focus on the raisin right now that you're eating, and as you're eating the raisin, feel like the feeling in your hand as you're like putting the raisin in your mouth, and then put the raisin in your mouth, like feel the raisin in your mouth, and then as you're chewing it, how does it feel, right? And then as you're swallowing, and so your attention went from all of these things that are in your mind to the activity that you're doing. And the video in Philly, right, on the Rocky Steps, we talked about positive action and how basically it's like you can take action. In the Bhagavad Gita, how they talk about like the fruit, right? You have the right to the action, but not to the fruit of the action. So what does that mean? Is that you're focused on just the moment. You're focused on just that activity for that moment, right? And so you're focused just on that activity for the moment, and you're just kind of like eating the raisin like the guy. But then she's like, okay, focus on the breath, focus on the breathing. And so the guy's like, focus on his breathing. He's like, all right, do this for the next like 5 minutes or something like that. And so he did that for the next 5 minutes. I'm like breathing, it's like a garbage can. I'm like, yes, amazing. I'm gonna take a deep breath and just like smell this wonderful thing. So right? He's focusing on his breathing for like 5 minutes, and all of a sudden his mind went quiet for a little bit, right? Like his attention went from all of the things that he had to do and all of the different emotions that he might have felt throughout the week or throughout the month to just his breathing. And then he said that he started doing that like every day. He started doing that for like 20 minutes a day, right? And it was like really, really helpful for him to kind of stop thinking for a moment. And so that's kind of what meditation is. But when you're trying to concentrate on one specific task or getting something done, I think that that's like the best thing to do. The best thing to do is probably just to do some meditation, man. But another thing is like the trauma release. We kind of get into that. But when you're feeling emotions, and then it's like in psychology, you have the repressive and suppressive kind of events in your life, things that happen. And so you'll have basically like these events that cause like specific energies in your body. And how does concentration actually like help, right? If there's a bunch of like distractions around and like your focus is kind of like tuning that out. So selective focus is another type of focus, right? So you basically have concentration, which is focusing on one thing, right? And basically you're just also selective focus on that almost, right? Like you're focusing on one thing, like your mind can't multitask. That's like a myth, right? Psychologists have found this out. Maybe your phone, right? It has like multitasking, like an iPhone has multitasking. But you as a person, psychologically, cannot actually multitask. What the mind and the focus is doing is going from one thing to the next thing. And it could jump back and forth, but it's a myth that you can multitask. You can't really be watching TV, reading. And I know like maybe when you're driving, right? And you're on the phone, yeah, you're like, oh, well, I'm multitasking. But you have two different types of basically like brain activity that happens. One of them is like bottom up, right? And so that's kind of like in the back. It's like automatic, right? And it's just kind of like happening without you focusing on it. It's like your heartbeat and your breathing. Like it's happening normally without you having to think about it. Habits are also like this. You can read a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And Charles Duhigg, I love this book. There's a few things that I got from it. But one of the things that is really, really interesting is about memory, okay? Memory loss. There was a guy that would like, basically had like a 5-second memory. This is like a real person, okay? I think there's like movies about it, but like this dude would actually forget every 5 seconds. He would, like something happened where he had an accident or something like that. And every 5 seconds, he didn't remember like anything, right? He would just forget. So he would be like, hey, how are you doing? And then he would, like 5 seconds later, he'd be like, who are you? Or maybe it was like 30 seconds of memory, but it was like really like he would just forget every 30 seconds, everything. But if you would ask him, if you were like, hey, where are you? He would be like, oh, I don't know. And then he would be like, where's the bathroom? He would be like, oh, I don't know. I don't know where the bathroom is. But if he had to use the bathroom, he would get up and go and use the bathroom. And so everybody was just kind of like, what? Like, how? What? Like, he has no memory. He doesn't know where the bathroom is. But if he has to use the bathroom, he just gets up and goes to the bathroom. And he knows exactly where it is. So what's going on there, right? And so psychologists started studying this. And there was this one time where he got lost, right? So imagine he's like losing his memory every 30 seconds. But then he like goes on a walk. He wanders off. He gets lost. And they can't find him. And he's like, oh my God, he's lost forever. I mean, we don't know where he is. He's losing his memory every 30 seconds. Like, how are we going to find him? Right? How is he going to find his way back home? And all of a sudden, he like appeared at the house. And they were like, what? Like, how? How did you remember? If you have this condition that you forget everything every 30 seconds, how did he know which house it was? And so they found out about habits. And they were like, yo, there's a trigger to the habit. And then that is like a conditioning that basically, once it gets triggered, you go through the action, and then afterwards, you kind of like have done that action. And that's what a habit is. So he had a habit of knowing where the bathroom was and being able to go to the bathroom. So if he needed to go to the bathroom, he would just go. But his memory, like the part of his brain, the hippocampus or something, that was in charge of the memory, wouldn't actually remember. But the habit, so what triggered was the mailbox. he saw the mailbox, and then I was like, oh, well, I go in to the house, right? And so the mailbox was the trigger that got him back to the house. So he was walking around the neighborhood, he saw the mailbox, and he's like, okay, this is my house, I'm gonna go in. And so that's what happened to him. I just think, I got that from that book, I always remember it. I just think it's really interesting. And so read that, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And he'll talk about like habits, and you can kind of think about that in your life. Like, what are habits that you have? Like smoking, that's a horrible habit, right? But you might have a trigger to it. You might be like, oh, you smell it or something like that, or you're like, you see somebody else doing it or something like that, and then you're like, oh, I got to do it. Or maybe you're feeling stressed, and all of a sudden you got to do it or something like that, right? So I think that that's kind of interesting too. Or maybe you're home alone, right? And that triggers you to eat something bad because nobody's watching, something like that, right? Where it's like a habit, right? So I think that that's interesting. He has another book called like Better, I think it's like Better, Faster, or Stronger, Better, Faster, or something like that. And that's a really interesting book too. But getting back to the different types of focuses, right? So you have the concentration, you have selective focus. So at any given moment, you basically have like all these things going on that you could focus on, but you can kind of choose to tune it out. You could choose to tune it out, and you could choose to focus on whatever it is. So if you're reading a book, right, you might like not focus. Like right now, if you look at your nose, right, and you're just looking at your nose, like you're always looking at your nose. But what your brain does is actually like, it only really recognizes patterns and a change in pattern. So imagine it was like a dark night, and you're looking out to see if like somebody was like there in the bushes or something like that, right? And you're looking out, and what your mind is doing is searching for different patterns. And so if something moves, it'll recognize that pattern. It'll like light up, and it'll just be like, oh, something changed there. There's like a different pattern there, right? And so that's kind of interesting about like your mind and how it kind of like only recognizes patterns. I remember reading this book called Creating a Mind, and it was about like how they're trying to create AI. And now we're like in that time, like AI is real now, right? Like 5 years ago, if you were talking about AI, it was still just fantastical. It was still like, that's not going to happen for like 100 years or something like that. You know what I mean? Like Terminator is just a movie, right? But now we actually have AI now, so it kind of isn't magic anymore. It's like reality, right? So that's kind of interesting. But in that book, you basically have like creating a mind, and it talks about that. It talks about how the mind recognizes patterns. Like it'll show you a letter, right? And it'll be like, this is A, but it'll only show you like half of the A, and your brain will like complete the pattern because it's seen it so many times that you're like, you know kind of what's going on there. So like when you're reading, your selective focus is like tuning out. Like when I was at the airport, right, trying to read, and they're on the loudspeaker being like, flight 327 is next or whatever, right? Like I would tune that out just to focus on the book. And so it's powerful to learn concentration and being able to do that. But there's different types of attention, and there's different types of focus. There's also awareness. Like open awareness means that you're just kind of like wandering. You're letting your mind wander, but also like maybe you're aware of your environment. You're kind of like aware of what's going on, right? And so that's kind of like a different thing. Like if you're at work and you're delegating tasks and you have a team and you're looking at your whole team and what they're doing and you're supervising or something like that, you got to kind of like look at the whole team. You got to maybe have the awareness, and you got to like make sure that the clients, you know, if there's clients coming into your shop or something like that, you got to be like attentive to that. But then also your employees, and you got to be like, you got to have like this open awareness of everything that's going on around you. And that's like a different type of attention and focus, right? It's not concentration, it's like awareness, it's open awareness. And then there's another type of focus, which is inner body awareness. This is what Eckhart Tolle calls it. And so it's kind of introspective, right? You're kind of like thinking back. You're thinking like, oh, like, you know, how was that thing? You're kind of like, did that go well? Did that not go well? You're introspecting, right? And when you're putting your focus on the inside, you can ask yourself this question. It's like one of the best questions that I ask myself this for many, many years, all the time. It was like, how am I feeling inside right now? How am I feeling inside? It's like basically you're checking in with yourself, right? You're like, how am I feeling, man? Am I feeling good right now? Am I feeling chill? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling angry? And throughout the day, like I asked myself that question for many years. I still do sometimes, right? But it's like, how am I feeling right now? Right? And so the thing about inner body awareness is that you can be so aware of everything that's going on the inside, right? Every thought that you have, every emotion, every like little thing in your body, you're like, oh, this hurts. Oh, right here. Oh, there's like an incongruency here. Oh, like I'm feeling my foot is like a little bit off. Oh, I'm feeling like maybe my right, like it's like my face is tightening up, and you're just like, or like this, like you see this a lot. It's like most people, or a lot of the times you'll see people sometimes that are stressed, and you could tell that they've been stressed throughout their lives because their face isn't relaxed. So I remember one of the things when I first started meditating, this one time I was meditating for like 30 minutes, and all of a sudden my face went like, it relaxed for the first time in like years maybe, right? Or months. And I was just like, oh my God, like what the heck? Like I was like, what the heck? It was so weird. But I think if your face is more relaxed, right? You kind of are just more relaxed too. You can focus on like the bottom of your spine, right? I don't know what chakra that is, okay? But you can like focus on the bottom of your spine and bring your attention there and take a deep breath from there. And it can kind of like center you too. And then you come back to concentration. But it's also inner concentration. So you have inner body awareness, you have open awareness, and then you have concentration. And so when your mind wanders off, right, to different things, like when something bad happens, like I remember, you know, if you ever like left a job or something like that, or you got fired or something like that, or maybe you had a breakup, or maybe you had a fallout with your friend, right, or you're going through a divorce or something like that. How much does your mind, or anything like that, any bad thing that happens, anything emotional that happens, how much does your mind focus on that thing? Like how much is it just like all the time just focusing on it, trying to like figure something out? And it's like you almost can't forgive, right? It's like you listen to like Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is like, forgive your enemies, love your enemy. How do you like, what reward will you get if you love those who love you? Don't even the tax collectors do that? That's what he says, right? So he says, what reward will you get if you love those who love you? What reward do you get if you love those who hate you? Right? But what is that? It's forgiveness. If you love somebody who hates you, you're kind of like, you know what? I forgive you. But why? Why is it that you forgive the person? Is it for them? Like you might not even be able to see them anymore. They're like across the country, like, right? You don't even talk to them anymore. It might be like an old friend or something like that. Or somebody who like at your old job did something bad to you or something like that. And those things is like your focus just goes on it, it magnifies on it, right? But it's like, is that person's no longer there, no longer like affecting you in any way, and you're just magnified on that happening, and your mind is just looping on it. Maybe you have to deal with like, you're a police officer, or maybe you're in litigation, you're a lawyer, and you're constantly having to deal with like, you know, criminals and people who are trying to like sue your client and things like that, and you're like looping on it, and you're getting angry and all this stuff, right? Well, can you kind of forgive, or somebody that did something bad to you? How long does it take you to kind of forgive them? And is that something for them, or is it for you? Is it for you to kind of like let go? Is it for you to kind of just forgive and forget? So, you know, you've heard this term, right? It's like living rent-free in your mind. Like if somebody does something to you, or somebody gets you like in your head, you're kind of like thinking about it, and you're like, that person is living rent-free in my mind. You get what I'm saying? Like you've heard this term, right? So why is that happening? And how can you get over that happening? How can you get back to concentration, to focusing on your goals so that you can knock them down and not be distracted by these emotional things that happen and like take away your attention, take away your time, take away your mental capital and your energy, right? It's by forgiving. A lot of the times it's like forgiving. You're just saying, you know what? I forgive you. And it's not just saying it. It's not like going up to the person and being like, I forgive you. It's about letting go of the resentments. It's letting go of the resentments. You're like, you know what? I resent that you did that, but I'm just gonna forget about it. I'm just gonna forgive you. And so you go into your body, you go into the emotions of how that made you feel at the time, and you try to accept that completely. You try to just accept it completely. You're like, you know what? I'm letting it go. Maybe you feel it completely. You're like, you know what? I'm gonna feel this emotion. However you made me feel, I'm going to feel it completely. I'm gonna let it go, and I'm gonna forgive that you made me feel in that way. And so that helps you not have them rent free in your mind. It helps you not get distracted by those things. It helps you go back to being focused on the task at hand. So if something, like let's say you're working, you're trying to get work done, but something happens with your client or something happens with an employee, right? And all of a sudden it's like something really bad happens. You have to figure it out. Like now you might have to focus on it and just get it done and fix that issue, fix that problem, be solution oriented. But how long are you looping on it? How long are you like thinking about it if you have other tasks to get done? Do you get what I'm saying? So I think that that's something that you should get really, really good at. It's just quickly getting over it. And having the discipline, it's like, how long does it take for you to actually forgive and forget? Like, how long does it actually take you to do that? The more discipline that you have in this, the more focus that you'll have throughout the day, the more energy that you'll have throughout the day, the more mental capital that you'll have to actually get to your goals and accomplish your goals. Right? Because if you're thinking about all the different things, especially like the news, you're watching the news, you're watching like what's going on, it's like, how much is that taking out? Like if you're pissed about like the government and you're pissed about like all these things that are happening, like how much time and energy and mental capital is that taking away from you that you could be focused on just solving your problems? I'm just being like, this is what I got to do today. This is what I got to do today. And then writing those goals down. A lot of the times you'll have something in your mind for like a month, a week, days, a year. Things that you want to do, things that you want to accomplish. And you're like thinking about it. You're thinking about it. Rather than just being like, you know what? I'm going to solve this right now. I'm going to solve this right now. Or I'm going to write it down. I have lists of like everything, bro. I have lists of like the locations that I'm gonna go. I have lists of